The Connected City Design Challenge is an urban design competition seeking design strategies to connect downtown Dallas and the Trinity River, curated by Larry Beasley and produced by the City of Dallas's City Design Studio. On November 5th, Stoss Urbanism of Boston with SHoP Architects of New York presented their team proposal for the Connected City Design Challenge at the Dallas Museum of Art. The lecture was hosted by the Dallas City Design Studio Director, Brent Brown. Special thanks to the Dallas Museum of Art for hosting the lecture. To learn more about the challenge, please visit connectedcitydesign.com.
Good evening and welcome again here to the Dallas Museum of Art and the Connected City. My name is Brent Brown, Director of the Dallas City Design Studio, and thank you for joining us this evening as we host our fourth discussion. We began with a panel discussion with our jury members, and tonight we end, the three professional teams by hosting Stoss SHoP here with us tonight. So quickly, thank you to our partners, to the Trinity Trust, to the City of Dallas, to the Real Estate Council, and to Downtown Dallas, Inc., who are all with us tonight. Thank you for your sponsorship of this and really believing and challenging us all to think about how to reconnect our downtown and our river, and really what Dallas and its future means for all of us and the potential for the next generation. The area, again, as a reminder, many of you are very familiar with this as you've been on this journey with us. I'm curious how many of you who have never been there may have gone and actually tried to walk in part of this part of our city. It has many challenges, as you will hear from our speakers tonight, and great ideas as well. Remember, in addition to the professional stream of ideas, we've had a big call to just about anybody and everybody. And with 120 ideas, which we will be discussing and we will be presenting in another round to come and to be talked about at a future date, we will see how we can learn outside of the technical professions of architecture, landscape architecture, planning, and into the ideas of citizens and artists and beyond. So as a reminder, and as I mentioned, our professional teams of Ricardo Bofill, OMA, and Stoss SHoP have each delivered to us inspirational ideas and a challenge back to us to think about now, how do we harness these ideas and how do we put them forward in shaping our city? And you can learn all about it on the website, right? So follow this in the coming weeks and months as we will not only convene the jury in a discussion, as we've shared before, a jury made up of our partners with regard to technical expertise from around the globe, and talk about what these ideas mean in shaping our city. What and how should we begin to embark on the next step? And we will be sharing that, as well as the container will leave here and the gallery will leave here from the DMA and move about our city. It'll find its way into Main Street and West End and probably even on top of a levee, that we can all begin to see our city in different ways and to learn how, even in our own daily lives, we can begin to help to improve and shape it. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage tonight from Stoss SHoP, Chris Reed and Vishan Chakrabarty. I butcher it every time, and I apologize terribly, and it's my East Texas down home roots, I think. But Vishan, Chris, please come to the stage. Welcome to Dallas. Thank you for your ideas, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts this evening.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. I know it's a bit of a dreary night, and we really appreciate your interest in coming and hearing some of our thoughts and getting the opportunity to give us some of your thoughts. I want to start by thanking our hosts, the Dallas Museum of Art. It's a great venue, great to be here tonight. I also want to thank the Dallas City Design Studio and the City of Dallas and the partners, the Trinity Trust, the Real Estate Council, and Downtown Dallas, Inc. It's been an amazing few months for us. It's been an honor, really, to be selected to participate in this initiative. to really think with all of you about the future of this city. It's been a challenging few months, but it's also been a fun few months for us. Projects that are as complex as this really require great teams. And I've got to say, we've got one of the best teams I've ever worked with. Not only Vishan and Omar, who's here in the front row from SHoP, but Alex Martinez from Gresham Smith and Partners, Amy Whitesides from my office. We've got an amazing team of engineers and scientists and hydrologists and economic development specialists and transit planners and all that who have really contributed meaningfully to the work that you're about to see. We also have a guy who's a local guy, Chris Beasley, who took many of the photographs you'll see tonight. Chris is in the audience tonight, and I want to thank Chris for being here and for his great contributions. By now, you're familiar with many of the issues that this challenge takes on. In particular, the challenge is posed by the many infrastructural barriers across the riverfront: highways and roadways, railways, levees, infrastructures that disconnect, that frustrate, that even make you feel small. The challenges of infrastructure here are many and multiple. They're physical, visual, and psychological barriers. They're resource intensive. They're noisy and polluting. They lower property values immediately around them, and they negatively affect quality of life. But I've got to say, these challenges, while they're real, are not insurmountable. Our team has been working across North America with cities facing some of the same challenges that Dallas is facing and finding ways to overcome these barriers. And that's what we're here tonight to talk to you about. But also of interest is the journey as you get lost. Now, first few times when we came here, we tried to find the river, and getting to the river, as you know, from downtown is a long trek. We got lost, and then we got lost again, and then we got rerouted, and then we went the other way, and it was hot in July. You all thought it was cold, by the way. It was about 98 degrees. I thought that was pretty hot. Anyway, along the way, you find some pretty interesting things, like donkeys at a car wash that's a truck stop and a taco stand with longhorn cattle, with Reunion Tower in the background. I mean, donkeys, for God's sake. An unleaded bison. What's that? I mean, how's that for mixed use? Now, admittedly, once you actually get there, get to the river, it's amazing, you know? I mean, here you really find magic, qualities of both intimacy and expanse, of a place that's thriving with the life and vitality of nature. And these are qualities surely to be enhanced by the new Trinity River Park. So the question of the day now is how to overcome these layers of infrastructure. How do we open up downtown Dallas to one of its greatest natural resources? And how do we create new forms of city life that are distinctly Texas, that are distinctly Dallas? Now, for us, it's important to build a new civic culture that will be less reliant on these 20th century infrastructures over time, and put in place proposals that civilize them, that ameliorate their effects, or that take them out of play entirely, at least on the level of how we experience the city. More broadly, we want to multiply and amplify the social, cultural, and economic benefits of living in the city, where residents, visitors, workers, and leaders of all types thrive on and build off the energies of one another. And we want to advance the idea that lively, vigorous, and productive landscapes can be a vehicle for a new kind of sustainable city life, in which people have direct access to social and cultural landscapes, active nature, if you will, at their urban doorsteps. Hyper-density, hyper-landscape is a strategy and vision for Dallas's future, one that reunites the city with its river and sets the stage for transformation starting now. HDHL is about dense city districts full of energy and exuberance, and intense landscapes that play many roles: social, economic, and environmental. It builds off Dallas's entrepreneurship, natural resources, business acumen, and diverse urban lifestyles. And it recognizes, importantly, that you don't have to choose between the inventive and the pragmatic, the visionary and the implementable, that a rich and vibrant and ambitious urban future inspired by Dallas itself can be achieved starting immediately. HDHL is uniquely Dallas reimagined. Now, at the core of this approach are 3 new dynamic mixed-use neighborhoods interspersed with regions of variegated, programmed, and sustainable landscape. It's a simple strategy in many ways. First, you extend the city fabric directly to the river, not as a second city that competes with downtown, but as connected neighborhoods that complement and augment downtown's increasingly vibrant districts. And you do it in areas of concentrated property ownership. Second, extend the landscape of the Trinity directly into downtown. Again, not as a replication of the new park, but as a socially active, lush, and shady landscape that brings new life to difficult places, sometimes where landscape is the only logical choice. The result is this alternating pattern of grid-green development. And in doing so, the new neighborhoods themselves build strategic and physical connections across infrastructural and geographic barriers. Highways, rail corridors, and levees are broken by bridges, decks, or air rights transfers, or surrounded by landscape forests that obscure them from view, clean their pollutants, reduce their noise, and, most importantly, create new spaces for recreation and culture. Now, the forest is key in developing a new ecology for the city, but it's not an extension of the wonderful, successful, small urban parks here in downtown, nor is it an imitation of the great Trinity Forest or even the new Trinity Park. It's something else entirely. Here, large forest fingers extend the natural systems of the Trinity River toward downtown. They begin as productive nurseries that seed the system. And they work. They create a carbon bank. They filter particulate matter associated with the highways out of the air. And they establish a new environmental resource in the heart of the city. They also provide shade and cover that the new park cannot. Most importantly, the forests we imagine are for people. They're quirky and programmatically rich. They include playful, active forests beneath highway interchanges, art walks between Dealey Plaza and the Riverfront, productive forests that clean air and water and double as new habitat, lush and exotic gardens with cafes and trails, nurseries and campgrounds that replenish the city with trees, build new constituencies, and offer new experiences. At the center of this landscape is the old Trinity River, brought back to life. Now, this is a strategy that gets at the soul of this place. Dallas's history with its rivers, you know, is sometimes wrenching. Think of the city's founding story of hope and then conflict along the riverbank. Think of the repeated flooding events that threaten the city's economic livelihood and put lives at risk. And then think of the subsequent relocation of the river and its physical and psychological isolation. Now, the proposed river park begins the process of healing, but the old river gardens go further, reinaugurating multiple civic, almost soulful connections to its river origins. Now, Pegasus is part of this. City symbol on the one hand, potential giver of life on the other. As we were doing research on Dallas, as we were beginning to think through what are the qualities that make Dallas unique, we came across some writings by your own Gail Thomas. where she talks about Pegasus and reminds us that the word Pegasus means geyser. And she writes, "He springs, he is the spring himself. Little wonder then, when his hoof strikes the earth, a well springs forth." What a wonderful and fantastical image, right? A winged horse galloping across the landscape, the Dallas landscape, releasing well springs of biological and civic life as it moves. We thought that was pretty cool, and so we tried to picture that like this. And like this. It also works backwards. Now, while the illustration may be tongue-in-cheek, the sentiment here is sincere. The myth of Pegasus really did become inspirational for us, for a revived and revitalized old river, transformed from lonely flood basins into a beautiful chain of water gardens with lush islands and floating cafes, water amphitheaters, water playgrounds, wet forests, floodable sports courts, and an urban beach. All to reconnect people with the original river that still longs to be here, and to create new life from Dallas's ancestral source. But we need to get it right. We need to build these gardens on a functional and sustainable water system that's not resource consumptive, and that works with the very particular nature and quality of the urban runoff that will feed these landscapes. So we worked with Tim Decker and his colleagues at Limnotech, one of the world's leading hydrologic engineers. They're at work now on the Mississippi River in St. Louis, on the Don River in Toronto, and on Waller Creek in Austin, among many, many, many other projects. And working with them, they developed a water management strategy that reworks the current water systems that move through the sumps. The proposed system here adds capacity to that system by tapping into underutilized stormwater from existing neighborhoods and from the runoff generated from new neighborhoods without hindering critical conveyance during extreme storm events. What's held in place will be filtered, cleansed, polished, and recirculated through forebays, cleansing wetlands and interactive water features so that it's safe to touch the water. The system will feed and irrigate the gardens and forests around them, and these forests importantly will shade the new water basins, creating new habitat and reducing water evaporation, critical in Dallas's hot summers. The old river gardens culminate in 3 new distinct spaces at the heart of each of our proposed neighborhoods. Vishan's going to take you through these neighborhoods in a few minutes. I just want to give you a sense of what these new gardens will be like. Starting with the water gardens in the south, brightly colored botanical, aviary, and music gardens with native and exotic songbirds, floating walkways, and pavilion cafes that draw on the stormwater runoff of adjacent and nearby neighborhoods to create lush and vibrant water gardens for live music and birdsong. The Trinity River Beach, a unique public destination that allows you to shed your inhibitions and shed a little clothes, to chill out in the hot sun. A distinctly urban beach that both embeds itself in this new district and reaches out to the Trinity River Park with undulating wood decking and boardwalks. And finally, the Pump Station Amphitheater, a new outdoor performance venue in the middle of a water basin, a celebratory moment where the city's waters meet the river floodway, a space for celebrating civic culture with a floating stage and wetlands, a concert and event venues, even opportunities for ice skating in winter, all nestled between the historic Houston Street Viaduct, a revitalized pump station and levee slope, and vibrant new mixed-use neighborhoods, a new cultural destination for the entire city. Together, these unique open space destinations bring life to the riverfront and serve as the heart of the proposal's new districts and neighborhoods. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Vishan now, who's going to talk about those neighborhoods and talk about the urban design, transit, and development frameworks that will give rise to them.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. We've had many joys working on this, but one of the great joys for us as the architects is actually to really let the landscape team, and in this case, an extraordinarily talented landscape team, lead this effort. And it's interesting to note that the cities from which we hail, Boston in Chris's case, New York in ours, both really found their value through the work of Frederick Law Olmsted and the extraordinary landscape acts that delivered so much public joy and public value to those cities. And we think this is very much the same kind of notion of landscape leading first. I will tell you that after working on millions of square feet all over the world, I've never quite seen a situation like this, where you have an extraordinary global city and its river, and separated by hundreds of acres of land. And the opportunity that represents is monumental. And we think that it requires a monumental response, but an implementable one, as Chris said. And just to go back to this idea of this stitching of green grid, and with a particular focus on these three neighborhoods that we think could connect you from your downtown to your river. And they are three neighborhoods, but they are all seen as one cogent and coherent vision, really knitted together by Riverfront Boulevard. And then to the north, towards the design district, this neighborhood that we call Deco, in the middle, the Viaduct, and then Riverfront South to the south. And each of them have their own distinct flavor and character, and we want to walk you through each of those in a little bit of detail. Starting with Deco, or what we call design crosses commerce. And the idea of this is that urban beach in the cross-section that Chris was talking about. And you see here a fairly dense neighborhood that is not that dissimilar in terms of the building scale that is already starting to emerge in that area of 10, 12-story buildings. And one of the things that we think is very important is in any great waterfront neighborhood, the blocks actually, the size of the blocks begin to shrink as you approach the water. And what that allows you to do is understand the water's presence before you even get there. It becomes more pedestrian friendly. The light bounces around in the buildings in a very distinct way. And we think this is very possible by the creation of these blocks, which are also quite friendly in terms of development. And so one would move across these blocks and get through a new art walk, from the Commerce Street section of town and towards the river through these new blocks with very much a focus on design. This is a view from the promenade on the beach looking back towards that district, and you can see that it's dense, but it's inviting. We think that in this area in particular, it calls for a lot of strong, bold, innovative architecture, and in this case, architecture that is quite porous, allows light and air through it as well as pedestrians through it, and creates a bold statement along the river at this new design district. And then moving south towards the Jefferson and Houston viaducts, where of course Union Station is, we think that there is the opportunity here for a high density corridor that moves from the center of Dallas towards the river. And so you see here this kind of high spine that develops between the two viaducts with the potential for both a new innovation campus, new shopping opportunities, and then quite a bit of dense new development that bridges over the horseshoe and gets you out towards the water. This is a view looking from the Jefferson Viaduct towards the Houston Viaduct. You see that amphitheater to which Chris referred. You see the density in the background, quite significant density, but then you see this means, again, to start not just bridging the physical distance from the city to the river, but the kind of cognitive and psychological distance from the city to the river. That the closer this development gets to the river will seem less and less further away. And we think that's very important, and actually the distances are quite doable in that regard. And so this is a view looking back from above the river back at the heart of your city, and you see both of the viaducts there with that amphitheater and then quite a bit of density right at your downtown, and really an extension of the existing downtown, a reinforcing of that downtown. And then to the south, the Riverfront South neighborhood, and this is the river right over here. And again, you see this is a slightly lower scale, sort of more medium density with cultural uses, as well as that amazing water park that Chris showed you. Again, a block size of about 200 by 200. This would develop over time. Here, one of the key things is how one gets over the rail corridor, and we have some very specific ideas about that in terms of how one bridges that rail corridor. And then you see this extension of the city grid moving all the way out to the water for a very special experience at the water's edge that I'll get to in a moment. And then again, that water park with the aviary gardens that Chris was referring to. Oh, and I should emphasize, this is of course Riverfront. And one of the things that we think is an enormous opportunity is this experience one could have moving north or south along Riverfront in terms of the staccato of city, then forest, and so forth. To connect all of this up, we actually don't think you need some big, expensive new transit system, but actually we think that a fairly simple loop along Riverfront could connect all of this back to the existing city. And so working with Nelson Nygaard, our very good transportation specialists, we've established this new blue loop that works upon your existing transit lines that would move people north up Riverfront Boulevard, and then back in a loop back to the heart of the city. And that would also connect to Union Station and reinforce at a regional level high-speed rail down to Houston and the rest of the Texas Triangle here. And we think that this light rail system is very important in terms of creating layers and layers of connectivity from the region to the city and then to the river. And so here you're seeing the heart of that Union Station hub, Union Station, new high-speed rail station, and a new dense hub developing around that. Now, of course, the other major regional transportation system that has been proposed is the tollway. And we understand that there's a regional desire here to connect north-south through the riverbed. But we also understand that people have been concerned about whether that tollway would further separate people in Dallas from their river. And then, of course, that river does flood, and a tollway would need to be designed accordingly. We think that there is the potential to leverage the tollway, not just to create a regional road, but actually to create a great new piece of pedestrian infrastructure for the people of Dallas. That basically at the culmination of this system, of these three neighborhoods and the forest coming in, that the tollway provides potentially an opportunity to create a fantastic destination and a promenade along the riverbank. And the way that would work is, so if this is a typical kind of cross-section with downtown off to your right and the Trinity to the left and the levee, that if you understand that the tollway is going to be set into the levee, and probably at something along that elevation in order to keep it from flooding too much, that we believe that with not too much technological wonder, one could bridge over, in some places deck over, the toll road and get out to a new promenade. And so that each city street could terminate with a kind of vertical marker, a kind of lantern, that would attract pedestrians and bicyclists and so forth to come over the toll road and get out to a new piece of public infrastructure. We imagine that, and as Chris said, this is this very intense 20th century kind of technology that we're talking about with all the concrete and the highways out there. And so we've proposed a kind of wood decking system. This decking system could undulate, could provide shade, could do a variety of different things, but also that the wood would provide a softness and a kind of warmth that, of course, you can't get from all of that concrete highway infrastructure. And that, as a consequence, this is a place that could flood, and that would be okay. But it would give you a magnificent destination at the end of the journey from the city to the river that we think is crucial in terms of all of this. And so you see in this image, here's the beach that Chris referred to earlier, and that undulating wood decking system. So the toll road is tucking right through there. And so we think both in the construction and in the financing of the toll road that there's a potential to build a great public piece of space for people in Dallas. Now, in terms of making all of that public space active and alive, what we've proposed in these three neighborhoods is that they are mixed use, but they're primarily residential. That they're really a place where people want to live and walk to work potentially, or take transit to work. We've not proposed too much office space. We're very aware of the vacancy in downtown Dallas today, and we wouldn't propose to cannibalize that further by proposing more office space, but instead have talked about residential that would reinforce the existing city and the existing needs of office space in the city. And so one of the things that we've resisted doing is taking this vast swath of land, almost 500 acres, and proposing development throughout its mass. That would practically quadruple the size of your city, and we don't think that that's a wise strategy. So instead, we've proposed to concentrate development in these three neighborhoods, and in these three neighborhoods in particular because they already connect to what you've got as tremendous assets. And really the way good development usually works is that it's accretive. It grows off of what is already here, like an organism, which all cities are. They're great biological organisms. And again, they're connected back to the city itself through this loop system. And I would just say that before I joined SHoP, I worked for the Bloomberg administration and was very involved with the development of the High Line. And when the High Line was proposed, a lot of people had questions about it. But what was interesting about it was that between the public investment and the private investment that went into the High Line, a great new neighborhood was born on the west side of Manhattan. And one of the commonalities that I really see here is that ability to have both public vision and a very spirited private sector that's willing to be philanthropic and generate enormous, enormous public value as well as private value for the city. So that's the story of the High Line. It's also the story of the waterfront. This is one of our projects on the East River, and with a new emerging residential community that's coming just adjacent to that river. And really, this is the story of cities across the country and cities across the world in terms of leveraging these kinds of investments to create value, both in terms of experiential value as well as financial value for your cities. And so we think this is very possible here. Yes, it will take public investment. Yes, it will take private investment, but not in numbers that are extraordinary or out of reach, and with the ability to tremendously enhance the competitive nature of Dallas, both in the region and at the national and at the international scale. And one of the things that we have been very focused on with this proposal is that this is a big vision, but it's an implementable vision. And one of the areas we think this is possible, that if you look, this is actually all the public land in the green that's either on city land or the lighter shade is state land where we've proposed reforestation. And so what you immediately see is that the public already controls much of the assets that's required to do what we've called for here. And so in terms of implementation, the story would go something like this, although it's always hard to sequence it exactly. But in terms of the zoning and an understanding of where landscape fingers go versus new development, again, concentrated where there's already consolidated ownership. The transportation infrastructure in terms of the tollway, the promenade, the new streets, the recreation of Riverfront. And we actually think Riverfront is really low-hanging fruit here in terms of one's ability to start work right away and actually create a series of nodes that are closer between the existing city and the river. And then the series of landscape moves that Chris talked about in terms of rejuvenating the old river as well as the forests. And then what we've seen time and time again in every city that we've worked in is with those kinds of public investments and assets that, of course, the right kind of private real estate follows. That it will take, a sequence of things in terms of new landscape, the demolition of the jails. We think the jails belong probably somewhere else, and the bail bondsmen that go with the jails. And that over time you would see further development, and then finally you would see the densest development occur near Union Station, near that high-speed rail hub, and along the 2 viaducts. Until you finally reach a tremendous new chapter in Dallas's history. Chris?
All right, so when do we get going? We think now. We think it's important to develop a series of activation strategies that build on the momentum of the design challenge and begin to prepare the ground for the transformations to come. So to begin, we propose light and art installations that mark the old river in a celebratory and civic way, that shift public perception toward the great opportunities here, and that signal a change in culture. We propose festivals that reactivate these sites, that get people down to the riverfront, and extend a lasting culture of distinctly Dallas events in and along the river. We propose nursery installations and urban camping opportunities that seed the projects to come and offer entirely new kinds of urban experiences in direct relationship to nature. These early wins then inaugurate a whole series of implementation initiatives, some of which Vishan just described, that are strategic, catalytic, and flexible. They build off existing land resources and ownership patterns, infrastructures, and designated high-priority sites. They leverage available lands and already scheduled projects to get things moving while policy changes and land swaps are executed. They identify catalyst sites for early infrastructural and landscape investment, which in turn spur development and generate revenue. And they continue to build momentum through the ongoing implementation of promenade and forest and other public infrastructures. Importantly, too, they foster new synergies between public, private, and philanthropic entities, and between new forms of dynamic city life and the active landscapes that enable them. HDHL intensifies the growing energy and vibrancy in the heart of Dallas, where people can live and work and play and study together. And it thrives on their interactions and energies, whether spontaneous or planned. It brings the experience of nature directly to their doorsteps, allowing for urban and landscape experiences not possible anywhere else, and for new urban ecologies uniquely rooted in this place. Hyper-density, hyper-landscape, hyper-connected, Dallas made new. Thank you. Great, we'll take questions, comments, your thoughts.
Sir.
Oh, right here.
I really like that your design and calmness and the transportation stations you got planned. Can you say that promise to be some like a city event thing, where they have festivals and stuff like that?
Yeah, the idea is to have a number of festivals early on in some of those big empty parking lots. And that starts to build a culture to get people used to the idea of being down there. And through time, you can build some of the transit networks, promenades, and other destinations that keep people there on a permanent basis. Yes?
For some of the other projects that you mentioned in New York in particular, what's the time frame for out there for evaluation. I don't know what process they have, might be similar or dissimilar to Dallas, and so implementation.
You know, it's funny. I went to work for the city right after 9/11 in 2002, and there was a lot of intense work to do, including the planning for the High Line. And every once in a while, I'd have to work late, and my wife would joke with me. She'd say, "You know, what's there? Some urban planning emergency? Is something going to happen in 40 years instead of 30 years?" But I got the last laugh, actually, because we started planning for the High Line in 2002. I took the first walk with my 5-year-old, I think, within 4 years of that, which is, as you know, light speed for urban planning. You know, we do think that there are a series of kind of low-hanging fruit, basically, especially along Riverfront. There are both landscape moves and development moves, and it's really about, I think, creating these sort of acupuncture moments where you start to send the signal to the development community that great things are going to happen here, and it makes sense to start building housing and so forth. It seems to me that those assets and that ability is in place, starting with the great light installation that Chris mentioned, but then going into the reforestation, the public land. There are a lot of assets that are already here.
Yeah, and one more comment, if I may. I want to commend you on how to integrate the tollway, because that's certainly been a dividing line for a lot of people on what to do with the levee, and I'm surprised to see how well that blended together.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, over here.
This is very exciting, and I'd really like to see it happen as planned. Now, how do we get the word out to everybody and get enough people to agree that this is a great idea and actually make a change?
Well, there is a lot of work ahead of us. But the City Design Studio has assembled a team of partners and stakeholders that are already having conversations about moving this forward. Conversations where individual property owners and developers who usually don't sit and talk together are in the same room talking about some of the issues with us, with the other teams, with the partners. And so they've done some amazing groundwork. We spent much of today in City Hall talking to city staff and some of the city leaders as well, beginning to brief them on our plans and getting into a lot of technical detail as well. I think there is a lot of work to do, but you know, while that good work is happening, we also think it's important to have some fun. And that's what these first installations are about. Do these things simultaneously so that you can really build some excitement and momentum for the work, so that the hard part of getting through the work doesn't seem nearly so difficult. Yeah, right in the middle, and then we'll go here.
Thank you for your presentation. There's a lot of interesting stuff to sort of absorb, a lot to take in. One thing that kind of immediately struck me that as could be a concern is with the inclusion of the tollway and the decking over it, and how much land mass and how much land area that actually is for the tollway along that entire stretch. And I was wondering if you considered any alternatives to what would happen in that area if the tollway weren't actually to be built, because it's something it's the only thing in the project that's planned but hasn't actually.
Well, you could certainly build the same promenade system that we've talked about. You know, to us, we understand that there's been some debate about this, and every good city has its debates, and that's a good thing. What we've tried to do is say that if you have this regional need, that there's a way to use this construction to do something great that's public. And one of the interesting things about this in terms of its section is that you already have a condition where the levee is high, and you have to move over that elevation to get to the actual riverbed. And so I think it would be a different situation if the tollway were up higher than the levee. So a pedestrian would have to move above that elevation, come back down. But I think because in this particular circumstance, you have to get up to that grade anyway to get over the levee. And so once you're there, it's really not a big stretch to move over that toll road and come back down on the other side. And so, whereas I completely understand the impulse that says if you build a big road there, it's going to cut you off from your river, I actually think that because of the conditions that already exist because of the levee system, there's a way to leverage this construction to make it something that's public and something for people here in the city.
It's also important to note that that decking happens intermittently.
Yes.
Yeah,
There you go.
there you go. So you can see it here near the beach. Just off screen are a couple areas, both to the north and the south, where you have thickened plazas that also deck over. And then you can see these other moments where the city street reaches over in a bridge. But once, as Vishan was saying earlier, once you actually have a place to live and a place to work and a place to do some fun things that's very close to the river, that little gap doesn't seem like a much of a gap anymore. You had a question.
Yeah, my question is, well, first I want to say it was a beautiful presentation. I really like the poetic nature of your descriptions of the different neighborhoods. I think that's excellent. I'm thinking of a connectivity concern possibly with only one boulevard, the Riverfront Boulevard, and there wasn't really any description of altering any of the infrastructure as far as like I-35 corridor goes and all that sort of, there's a really big traffic issue there. And I'm just wondering, creating all the density in this neighborhood, will it exacerbate traffic without having some sort of intervention with the roadways and the Texas Department of Transportation?
Well, certainly, this is why you do need a transportation system that's robust here. And in the beginning, there's probably not going to be so much density along Riverfront that you're going to need more than bus rapid transit. But I do think serious bus rapid transit, real bus rapid transit with dedicated lanes and so forth, is the right first step to, again, signal to the development community that there is a serious intention here to provide amenity and infrastructure in this new series of neighborhoods, and then ultimately get it to light rail and make it part of the DART system. Again, the promenade helps because now there's a sort of parallel system that's out on the riverfront itself, and so. But I would just say, it's interesting, this issue of congestion. I think this area that we're talking about, this whole band, needs a sense of congestion right now. Not traffic congestion so much, but a sense of sort of pedestrian intensity and so forth. And so we actually think that Riverfront is really the right place to concentrate. The other thing is, Riverfront is really about this experience of moving north-south through this entire system, but the way the neighborhoods are set up, they're really about grids on the cross-grain moving back and forth between the river and the city. And that's really where we're trying to focus a lot of intensity. And that's not just one connection, but a whole series of streets that move people back and forth as both pedestrians, bicyclists, and of course in cars.
Over here.
How would you deal with the situation how 35 get congested all the time, and then by putting all the new programs in, and then with the existing traffic already on the highway, do you have any solutions?
Well, one of the ideas behind the scheme is that we give people places to live and work downtown. That some of the folks who are already working downtown and not living downtown can now live here and walk to work, thereby taking cars off the street. And I think that's one of the key things that we try to do. That's what I was talking about up front when I said, we're really looking to start to, shift the culture a little bit, find good ways for people to live in close proximity to the places that they go to school, that they work, that they shop, and that they play. And that'll start to help.
Yeah, it's tempting to look at the entirety of the horseshoe and say, wouldn't it be wonderful to wave a magic wand and get rid of what some people might consider a lot of ugly infrastructure? But obviously, it's heavily used infrastructure. There's a lot of traffic there, and I don't think you can just wave it away. But the Dallas almost has it all. But I think the thing that it really still needs much more of are people living downtown and walking to work, bicycling to work, the things that are happening in every major city really around the world. And it's really about creating that dense fabric so that people feel much more comfortable moving back and forth just at the city level without having to get on the highway.
What else back here?
Seems like you dealt with probably the toughest problem, which is the distance between the river itself and the city, and some of the blight that's going on there. Is there a vision for the river itself being able to access the new channels rather than the old channels?
Yeah, I think one of the things we wanted to do is make sure that the plan for the River Park was really being supported and enhanced by the work that we're doing. The promenade that Vishaan described really makes that a wonderful urban edge. It says, look, this really is the place that the city kisses the river, right? It really intensifies that moment. Beyond that, it's just getting people to live and work and play closer. You're shrinking an enormous gap by just having people already there.
And we hope actually that will start to spur some new things happening on the other side of the river, which of course was out of the scope of the competition, but that those fingers would continue, many of these same strategies could continue in terms of what would happen on the other side, and then you get this real reinforcing of the river from both directions.
Right in the middle there.
Trying to bring the city to the river, why add the tollway, which is a route where 85% of the people are passing through Dallas to get somewhere else? Why can't we just eliminate the tollway and bring it all the way to the river so I can walk to the river without breaking a leg crossing the tollway?
There's been a lot of thought about the tollway, huh? I mean, look, there could be a number of futures with the tollway. The tollway could go away, right? We're not staking our project, our proposal, on the tollway going away. We're making a good project that says, you know what, we can leverage that and make it into an asset, right? If the tollway, through negotiation and discussion, if that ends up not happening, our project only gets better, right? That's a long, long conversation about whether it's needed, whether it's not needed. We felt like it was important to show you a really wonderful option if it stays in place.
Yeah, said a different way. No, I totally agree with Chris. I'm just right now. I'm just all I'm trying to say is that the tollway is not the central figure in whether or not you get reconnected to your river.
That's right.
Right? That is not the deciding factor here. There's absolutely a way to have the tollway and still be connected to your river. And so this tries to take the stance that, as Chris said, if you didn't have the tollway, you could still build that promenade. We actually think that the tollway might be an interesting way to get to, fund, and construct that promenade. What I would say is that if the tollway is going to happen, that you have to insist that there's this public piece that's built as part of it. So that it's not just a regional mechanism, but is also something that is of great local benefit.
Up here in the back.
What kind of system are y'all thinking about for maintenance of the river itself after it's flooded and it's filled in, brings all the debris from the north down, and then how do you clean it beforehand as well?
Yeah. The system that we've worked through with Limnotech is really all the water before it gets to the river itself. So we're dealing with water outside of the levees. What we're doing is daylighting some of the underground pipes early on And then creating a system of what they call forebays, which is a place for the water to kind of deposit the sediment that's in them, right? And then that water goes through a series of cleansing wetlands to improve the water quality, and then through a series of secondary, tertiary wetlands that continue to improve the water quality. So a lot of the materials that you're talking about are intercepted just upstream, probably underneath some of the highway interchanges where people aren't going to be anyway. So that whole part of the system is an important one, as you say, but it's not really front and center for where people are. What we wanted to do was expand that system to really allow for the proliferation of these public spaces, these water gardens, the amphitheaters, all that, places for people to begin to interact with that, so that you can have something that certainly functions for the flooding and for the stormwater, but creates some real civic amenities. Yeah, here.
There's always been a sentiment that the Trinity River should work more as a spine for Dallas than a separator.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you say that the tollway can take it or leave it. Either way, this proposal is complete. What's your vision on the other side of the Trinity, where is there a future for Dallas connecting both of those? And can you see your project extending on to the other ends?
Absolutely. I mean, this becomes one of the questions of where do you end the competition proposal, right? Where do you start to draw the line? And we had many drawings that did start to draw that other piece of it. I mean, this proposal essentially says bring the city as close as you can to the river, right? And then extend landscape. We think this strategy works on the other side as well, right? Extend and reinforce some of the neighborhoods that are there. Give them access to the river. Give them good amenities, good schools, good neighborhoods, right? And by doing this on both sides of the river where you already have river crossings, you're getting more and more people closer to these destinations so that they feel exactly what you said up front, that the river now becomes a spine that unites the different parts of the city rather than something that divides it. So this is a strategy in our mind that really can be replicated up and down the river and on both sides of the river.
Yeah, if you look at that drawing and you understand that right now, for people to think about the other side of the river, they're thinking about this entire expanse of land. But as soon as these things happen, now you're just talking about that expanse of land. And that's a very different cognitive distance in people's minds in terms of how far the other side of the river is. It stops being, quote, the other side of the river and just another part of the city that's vibrant and active and has its own identity and its own right.
Back there.
You had made the comment about reforesting and making it available for camping. And of course, the city of Dallas doesn't allow its citizens to camp in its parks. But I was curious.
Today they don't.
I was curious why you consider widening the levee to be a priority over reforestation when you've got so much public land already available that could readily be reforested tomorrow.
Yeah, on those initiatives, we think it's a simultaneous set of actions, right? Do as much as you can early on. The lighting of the levee is simply one of a number of strategies that in some ways kind of celebrate the infrastructure of the 20th century. Say, you know what, that's not really the issue here. There are many things that we can begin to talk about, celebrate, activate, draw people's attention to as there being something going on in the river. But I think that runs side by side with the idea that we can start planting trees now. In fact, just this morning, we had somebody from the real estate council saying, I have a site, I'm going to go plant trees. She's very eager to get this going. I think all these things together will begin to build the momentum that we need to carry this thing forward. Right down here.
I didn't see anything with reference to trails. For example, Katy Trail is probably one of the most popular and overcrowded now. The promenade is an analogy to the High Line in New York. But the High Line is immersed in the urban environment. The promenade is not. such. But perhaps one of the first things you could do together with the lighting is provide a trail system that would link some of this and also take people much of the load off the rest of the trail system that already exists.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think, the idea to get people out there to forge these new pathways, I think,
Very inexpensive.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then you can begin to organize tours of some of the new installations and the nurseries and all that. That's the idea, is to really get as many people down here as possible. Back here.
Well, I'm Jeanette Mears from the Texas Trees Foundation.
Hello. Come on up.
Putting together a plan for the city of Dallas to reforest all of Dallas.
Excellent.
I think what you've done here, though, is jumpstart what needed to be done probably 50 years ago. But the sustainability from the environmental perspective is awesome in terms of looking at air quality, heat island mitigation, watershed management, ambient air. I think it will make a huge difference along this area, and I think that it will be something that we can actually replicate in other parks. And we have done some of the underpasses on Woodall Rogers and out on Highway 30, and they transform the landscape. And not only do they transform the landscape, but they transform how people interact with the land and how they interact with each other. I commend you for what you've done. It's really good job.
Thanks. Thank you. I think you're my new best friend. What else? Right here in the middle.
Is there an issue with water in the wetlands if there's no stormwater, like during drought conditions? Because I know during the summer months, the Trinity actually dries up except for wastewater.
Right. There's a tendency to try to flush the sumps. And what we want to do is hold as much of that water in place for as long as possible. Doesn't mean you won't get variation, you still will. But by admitting more water into the system, we're actually increasing capacity even above what's already proposed as an increased capacity, I think by 40%. We're allowing more water into the system in the first place, and we're holding it for a longer time. We're not just simply releasing it into the river. So in that way, we're also helping essentially the flood condition in the river by holding that water in place. Anything else?
I just wanted to say one last thing. We work in many, many places, and you can always tell when something's going to happen and when something isn't. And when hundreds of people come out on a rainy night and you see the kind of activity and energy there is around all of this, you know that this can happen. So we very much thank you for letting us participate in it.
Great. Thanks.
So with I'll do the 10-second to the end quick version here. I'll leave it here on this slide, which is very we're very appreciative of both to Stoss and SHoP. Thank you for your work, to the whole team, those here in Dallas as well as around the globe. So I'm hoping now, as we've concluded our fourth night, that we're inspired. I've heard questions that have said, now, how do we get to work? And so a couple of things. As I've mentioned, connectedcitydesign.com. Go online. You can follow us. You can like it. You can send us an email. If you'd like to volunteer, you want to create a Get the Lighting Done committee, let's do it. We're here both at the City of Dallas, the Real Estate Council, the Trinity Trust, Downtown Dallas. All of these organizations need your energy, need your ideas. And to other partners, the American Institute of Architects, the Dallas chapter, the Center for Architecture, Greater Dallas Planning Council, the Trinity Commons, all these organizations that have said, let's dream big about our city. Let's get our river done, right? And let's find a way to get there. and let's have fun doing it. Let's explore it, and let's make Dallas in the future livable for every person in Dallas. So with that, thank you for your time tonight. Please watch. There will be announcements coming, and there will be more events, I can promise you, after tonight. So with that, good night.
Thank you for watching this video. For more information, please visit connectedcitydesign.com.